This is a very simple amendment. It prohibits TransCanada from using eminent domain proceedings to seize private property in order to build the Keystone XL pipeline. As we all know, eminent domain is the power of a governmental entity to take private property and convert it to public use subject to reasonable compensation. Now, traditionally, property could only be seized for public use, such as a public park or a public road, but increasingly the exercise of eminent domain has been used for private gain. Many, including some of my most conservative friends on the other side, are outraged by the idea that eminent domain proceedings could be used to seize private property for private gain. President Bush issued an executive order restricting the use of eminent domain by the federal government to, quote, the purpose of benefiting the general public and not merely for the purpose of advancing the economic interests of private parties. The senior senator from Texas introduced the, quote, Protection of Homes, Small Businesses, and Private Property Act of 2005, which would have prohibited the use of eminent domain by federal, state, or local government entities for private economic development. Now, I have been working very closely with Senator Cantwell on this amendment, and we agreed with our conservative colleagues that using eminent domain proceedings for private gain is outrageous. Here, on the issue of Keystone, a foreign-owned company is using eminent domain to seize private property so it can better export Canadian oil. The project is not in the public interest, but it is clearly in the special interest. Now, I do not begrudge the fact that a Canadian company wants its subsidiary to build this pipeline so it can export foreign oil to distant shores through American infrastructure. They want to make a profit, and I understand that. But I do not think we should allow our sovereignty to be compromised in order to do it. Right now, the U.S. federal government is trying to build a ferry terminal in Canada to serve Alaska. But Canadians are protecting their sovereignty and objecting to U.S. steel and other U.S. content from being the sole source for the ferry terminal. Now, I disagree with Canada on that point, but I understand that they want to protect their sovereignty. So similarly, we need to protect American sovereignty and American landowners from a Canadian-owned company who wants to seize our private lands for private gain and force Americans to take a risk of Canadian pollution. Now, over the weekend, we saw landowners along the route of the Keystone XL pipeline are seeing a pipeline spill on the Yellowstone River in Montana. It's happening now. And if you were to see pictures of it, you would see that the efforts to clean up the spill are being hindered by a sheet of ice. Who knows what damage is being done by 50,000 gallons of oil in this river? We may not know until spring. Landowners are wondering if their family farm will be the victim of a similar spill, wondering if property that has been in their family for generations can still be farmland passed on to the next generation. One landowner who has seen firsthand what can happen when a pipeline is put on your property is Lori Collins. In October of 2012, Lori Collins walked outside her home to find that construction workers for a TransCanada contractor trying to clear the way for the southern leg of the Keystone pipeline. They had dug up the lines to her septic system, completely destroying it. When she asked the workers to repair the damage, they did not. Instead, they piled dirt over the damage and clogged the system. The result was raw sewage flooding back into the Collins home, staining walls and carpets, leaving a black mold throughout their house, and leaving Lori Collins with severe respiratory problems. The Collins family were eventually forced to move out of their home. While they were able to get a settlement after suing TransCanada, the family says they can never repair the damage to their lives. Jim Tarnock, a farmer in Nebraska, has heard of TransCanada's track record and fears that he might have to suffer similar damage, or worse, face an oil spill. TransCanada wants to put the pipeline right through his front yard on his property that has been in his family for over 100 years. Mr. Tarnock's farm sits near the Ogallala Aquifer that provides critical fresh water for farmers and ranchers in the heart of U.S. farm country. A pipeline spill like the one on the Yellowstone River over the last few days could damage the aquifer and therefore jeopardize a resource relied on by Nebraskan farms and ranchers. Mr. Tarnock feels that he will be served with papers invoking eminent domain on his property any day now. TransCanada is asking that he and other Nebraskans trust that they will protect the Ogallala Aquifer and the livelihoods it supports. Instead of forcing Mr. Tarnock to host the Keystone Pipeline against his will, let's instead let TransCanada work with landowners who are willing to take the risk and will be paid what they feel, is fair, rather than what TransCanada's lawyers can convince a judge is fair. Senator Cantwell and I feel this amendment is one of simple fairness and should be a no-brainer, an easy amendment every senator can support. Mr. President, in recent years, Republicans have insisted on similar language prohibiting the use of eminent domain when we establish national parks. If eminent domain cannot be used to establish a national park in the public interest to conserve our national treasures and preserve America's beauty for future generations, then surely it should not be used to benefit private interests. In this case, in the interest of a foreign-owned oil company seeking to ship its product around the world. I call on my colleagues to be consistent, stand on principle and logic, protect landowners, and support my amendment to protect private property from seizure by foreign corporations, preserve our sovereignty, and preserve the rights of U.S. citizens along the way. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.